This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Okay, if you haven't heard, the Affinity products were bought by Canva, and then a few days ago, they made all the Affinity products free, as well as doing a major update. So we're now on Affinity version 3, and all of the products are free. In previous versions of Affinity Photo, it's had a very good astrophotography tool set, I think largely thanks to this man, James Ritson, who works at Affinity and also offers free astrophotography macros for Affinity Photo. And so what I wanted to see was, with this new free version of Affinity, do all the astrophotography features still exist? How do they work? Because that could be a very compelling option for us deep sky astrophotographers. So that's what we'll be trying out in this video, and it'll be sort of a exploration / tutorial. Okay, so the first thing is Affinity by Canva for desktop is available on Mac OS and Windows. There is no Linux version, so for Linux users, you can check out some of my other free software tutorials, but if you have Mac or Windows, you could try this out. And you do need to make a Canva account in order to download the app, but otherwise it's completely free. Okay, and then for this tutorial, we're also going to be checking out James Ritson's astrophotography macros. So you can go to his website, the link will be in the description, or it's jamesritson.co.uk, and download his version 19 macros. Okay, then go ahead and install Affinity. It should just be straightforward. You can see here on my desktop, I also have the macros. I'll just double click to unzip those. Okay, so we have the James Ritson macros unzipped right here on the desktop. Here's Affinity. Before we import them, let me just point out something about the new Affinity, which it's actually combining a number of different products into one application. So these used to be separate products, and now they've renamed them and put them all into this one thing called Affinity. But the one that we're concerned with for deep sky astrophotography is now called Affinity Pixel. So in here, it'll open up on the vector application, but we actually want the pixel application, what used to be called Affinity Photo. Okay, so make sure that you click on Pixel up here at the top. And then to import the macros, we can go to Window, Pixel, Library. And up here at the top of the library, there's this little down caret, and we can import the macros right there and just choose them from wherever they are on our computer. Or you can just drag this to the side a little bit and double click on wherever you have your macros located, select them, and then just drag them here into Affinity, and it'll just tell you you've imported some new categories. You say okay a few times, and now you can see here in the library window, we have all of the different macros imported. When I resized and moved this larger window, this became a floating window. If I want to dock it back here, I can just sort of move it to this side of the interface, and then you can see this blue docking thing comes up, and then you let go, and it's docked over here. If you ever want to release it, you just grab it again and you can put it somewhere else. So for now, I'm just going to put it down here, and then later on, we might bring it back up. I'll admit that personally, I am considering dropping Photoshop if Affinity meets all of my needs, because Photoshop, the price keeps going up, and it's a monthly subscription, and money's always tight. So if this free program does everything I want and that Photoshop does, maybe I'll drop my Adobe subscription. Let's test this out now, and we're going to test it out with actual astrophotography data. This is some data I have of the Orion Nebula taken with a ZWO ASI 2600 MC camera and an ASCAR 71F. It's just 1 hour of data, 3-minute subs, and I thought this might be a nice test for the new Affinity version 3. So we have that on the desktop. We're going to go to File, New Image Process, Astrophotography Stack. The whole interface changes, and over here is where we're going to add our files, right here where it says Files. And you can see there's this option to do multiple file groups, and you can add a file group. That's if you are doing sort of multi-night processing or something like that. There's also this option to put in different filters, the common 7 filters if you're shooting with a mono camera, or you can just leave this blank if you're shooting with a one-shot color, like we are here. And then we just go through the different types of frames and add them there. Okay, so I'm going to click Add Files and add my light frames. And you can see it automatically loads them in here and displays them. And so this is sort of nice. You can blink through them like this. Okay, but let's keep adding frames now. So I'll go to my bias frames, click Add Files, and we'll just add each type here. Okay, so all my data is added. We can now go into this stacking options, and you can see there's some different options here. I'm going to use Sigma clipping so that if there's any satellite trails or hot pixels that have been dithered or different things like that, they will be rejected by the stacking. We can leave it on inferred for the Bayer pattern. That should mean that it'll find it automatically. Okay, the only other option we have here is down here. It says select best light frames, and you can put in a percentage. Since we're only dealing with 20 light frames, 1 hour of data, I'm going to leave it at 100%. And just looking through this list of lights, they all seem fairly consistent. So I don't think I need to lower that percentage. So now we're ready to stack. So I can just go up here to where it says stack at the top and click that word stack. It starts by saying detecting bad pixels. And then it just gives you this dialog that says Astrophotography stack. So it doesn't give you a lot of information about what it's doing at any given point, but we can assume it's calibrating and registering and stacking all of the data that we loaded up. I would prefer a little bit more information just to feel that it's that I know what it's doing. Okay, then it says 20 light frames were stacked. We can see that there's more detail in the stacked version than the single version. And then we can just go ahead and click apply if we are okay with accepting this. Okay, one point I want to make right up front here is that in my stacking comparison, I got a little confused because even if you turn off this basic tone stretch, this says linear, but this doesn't look linear to me. And that's because of basically a view mode that's on by default. Assuming that you're going to save it as a JPEG or something, this is how it would actually look as a JPEG. But let's say you wanted it to look really linear in an unmanaged view. You can go to Window Pixel 32-bit Preview and turn the display transform from ICC to display transform to unmanaged, and you get a really linear view like you would in other astrophotography software like Cyril or PixInsight. So it is there, and the data is still actually 32-bit linear, but if you want that same view as you would get in other programs, you do have to go in here and turn the display transform to unmanaged. But if you're going to continue processing in Affinity, you don't want it on unmanaged, because then you would do all your processing, and when you go to actually save it as a JPEG or export it as a JPEG, it will look completely different. So turn back on the display transform if you're going to continue processing in Affinity. Okay, hopefully that made sense. I'm going to turn back on the basic tone stretch here for a second because I want to show you Affinity's background removal. So if you go to Pixel, Filters, Astrophotography, Remove Background, this works a little bit differently than other remove background tools I've used. Instead of placing many samples, you just use this one sample picker, and you move it to an area of just sky, and then you click Sample Color at Handle, and it will do a nice job of removing the background. And you can very quickly move this around and see, like, if I put it right on the nebula, you can see it's not going to do a good job of removing the background because I'm not sampling the background. But if I pick a fairly representative sample of the background, then it does do a good job. Okay. And then the only other thing I would move here is this output black level. You could get a very contrasty look, but I would try to preserve as much of this dust for later. So I'm going to do a fairly high output black level and click apply. Okay. And so you can we still just have this basic tone stretch on here. One of the nice things with downloading James Ritson's macros is that he has a bunch of other kinds of stretches built in. Those are some of my favorite macros that I've found from him so far. So let's check some of those out. So we'll go to the library here just to make this a little bit easier. I'm going to move this to the left-hand side and we'll resize our image here. There we go. And let's turn off this basic tone stretch and go into his stretching category. And there's the basic tone stretch again, but he also has arcsine tone stretch, logarithmic tone stretch, color preserving tone stretch, neutral tone stretch. So a bunch of different options here. And I'm going to do arcsine tone stretch. I think I like it. It's hard to say. Let's try the color preserving. So that's interesting. It's quite bright. I feel like it's a little too much of a stretch for a starting point. If I turn down the opacity, let's see what happens. Yeah, even if I turn down the opacity, it's just a very contrasty stretch, so I'm not sure about that one. I have watched some of James Ritson's processing tutorials, and he does point out that because these are still like 32-bit, you could combine these stretches with like recover highlights, and there's still plenty of like tonal range in here to work with. It's not even if something looks clipped, it's not necessarily clipped. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable working that way, so I'm gonna just delete some of these. And I think I like this starting point better, this arcsine tone stretch. I'm just going to make a new from visible. So I'm going to do Command Option Shift E and call this starless. Because the next thing I want to show you is that we can remove the stars from this and continue on with just a stars only and a starless version if you are willing to pay for Russell Croman's Star Exterminator plugin. If not, what you'd have to do is export like as a TIFF at this point and use StarNet, which is free, and then bring it back in. But if you're willing to pay for the plugin, it does come right in here into Affinity version 3. So under Pixel, filters, plugins, RC Astro Star Exterminator. You can run that. Okay, you can see it did a nice job of removing the stars. Now let's make a stars only layer. To do that, we'll change this one from normal to difference. So now we have just the stars, and then we'll save off that layer. Again, Command Option Shift E if you're on Mac, or Control Alt Shift E if you're on Windows. It made this new layer from visible. We'll call this stars. And right now we have two versions of that, but we want to change this layer back to just the starless layer. So we'll change that back to a normal mode. And why are we still seeing the stars only? Because it's on top. So if we want to now blend these two things together, we can change the stars blend mode to screen, for instance. And now you can see we just have the stars alone on the stars layer and the starless layer below it. Okay, and this can come in handy for all kinds of reasons, because let's say you like how the stars look at this point, but you now want to just work on the starless layer. You can click on the starless layer, and now any filter here I add or adjustment layer I add is only going to apply to the starless layer. So let's say I wanted to add a curves adjustment to this starless layer, but not have it apply to the stars. I would just click on the starless layer, and when I go to Pixel, New Adjustment Layer, Curves, you can see that curves adjustment is added to the layer panel, but it's added above the starless layer, but below the stars layer. So then when I adjust it here, it's only applying to what's below it. So it's not changing the intensity of the stars, but I can add in more punch or a different black level for the nebula. And this could also apply if I wanted to apply some of these macros, if I didn't want them to apply to the stars. So for instance, like maybe I didn't want to change the saturation on the stars, but I do want to change it on the nebula. Let's try punch and saturation. And I'll turn that off and on. And you can see that's only applying to the nebula, not the stars layer. So hopefully this is all making sense so far, especially if you're a Photoshop user. Of course, one thing I really like about any layers-based image application is I can go into these adjustments and double-click them and open them up and adjust them at any point. Like after that punch and saturation, I could see that the overall picture is just a little too green. So I could open up my curves adjustment layer here and just very slightly bring down the green curve, and it looks much better. So it's very easy just to go in and use these dynamic adjustments however you want. Okay, now let's say I needed to apply something just to the stars layer. This is a small difference with Photoshop. Let me just show you. So let's do new adjustment layer, HSL for hue, saturation, lightness. And I'm just going to take the saturation shift and bring it way over. Okay, and so you can see that when I did that, it applied that saturation shift to the entire image, so that radically changed the nebula. Now, if I was in Photoshop, I would hold down Option or Alt and click on this little line between the two, and then it clips this adjustment layer to just the stars. In Affinity, though, what you do is you grab this adjustment layer and you drag it right on top of the stars layer, and then it says place inside. And that's the same difference, basically. You can see now that saturation adjustment right here is only applying to the stars layer and not the whole image. Okay, but that's another really key reason why I like working with starless versus stars, is that I can apply the saturation adjustment differently between the two. So now the stars are too saturated for my taste, so I would just go in here and bring this down to taste. But you can see now it's only applying to the stars layer when I'm changing that saturation shift. So I'm just going to make them a slightly more saturated, but not as much as we had before. Okay, so one more thing I want to show you is let's turn off the stars layer here, and let's make a new from visible. Command Option Shift E on Mac, or maybe Control Alt Shift E on Windows, and I'm just going to call this noise reduction. Okay, so in addition to the star exterminator, which we already used, you can also get noise exterminator here in Affinity. And this is a very handy tool by Russell Croweman because it's uses a neural network trained on astrophotography data to reduce the noise in your image. So you can see if I zoom in on the shadows, there's plenty of color noise and modeling here. Let's see how this works. So we're going to go Pixel, Filters, Plugins, RC Astro, Noise Exterminator. We can just use these settings I used last time. Denoise intensity 65, denoise color 90. Okay, and if I turn off and on the eyeball here, the visibility of this noise reduction layer, you can see it really removed a lot of that high frequency noise. Now let's see if it damaged any of the detail in the more luminous areas. And it really didn't, but if you did notice any destruction of detail in these more high signal areas, you could always now just add a luminosity mask to this noise reduction layer. Luminosity masks are very easy to make in Affinity. Let me just show you that really quick. So if I option, click on this like make a new layer mask. There's a luminosity range mask option. And let me actually zoom out on this, turn on the preview. Okay, and so if I wanted to protect the dark areas of the picture, I would bring down this shadow one, but I want to protect the high signal areas, so I'm going to bring down this one and actually make it a little bit more of like a curve like this. Okay, so now I'm protecting these really high signal areas and letting it do the full strength of the noise reduction everywhere else. I'll turn back off the preview. Okay, and so now you can see that noise reduction layer has a luminosity range mask applied to it. And so what that means is it's now that noise exterminator is not being applied in this area, but out here it would be applied. Hopefully that makes sense. You can always get back into this by just double clicking here, turning back on the preview, and playing around with the luminosity map. Okay, with that noise reduction done, I can turn back on my stars and we can go ahead and save this. So we'll just do save as. This saves in the .af format for Affinity. And this is what you would save as if you want to ever get back in here and keep messing with the layers and keep editing. If you just want to export it quickly, there's this little option up here to export as PNG or JPEG. You can switch it up here. It gives you basically all the different options right up here, and then you can just quickly press the button and you're exporting a JPEG. It's also available under the File menu under Export, and this has even more options, like TIFF or things like that if you need to bring it into another program. It even has a PSD Photoshop document, so if you're still sort of transitioning between the two, like I might be here in the next year, that's handy as well to be able to save it as a PSD if I'm ever confused about things that I know I can do in Photoshop, but don't know yet how to do in Affinity. Okay, hopefully this was a helpful little overview of Affinity V3, which is now free, other than the Russell Croman plugins, but the program itself and the James Ritson macros are free. James Ritson does have the ability to donate on his site, so if you enjoy the macros, you can donate to him for those. And if there's anything that I could improve on or do differently, let people know in the comments. Again, I'm still transitioning, maybe thinking about dropping Photoshop, moving to this. So then there would be more on this in the future if I do make that switch. Right now, I don't really see any reason to hold on to Photoshop because this seems to have everything I would want. I just have to learn the little peculiarities of it because there's just a few things that are a little different. Once you've mastered processing with Affinity and have a photo you like, what should you do with it? Well, I think the best place to put your astrophotography portfolio is on your own website that you control, and today's sponsor, Squarespace, makes that so easy. You can get a custom domain, like I'm using nicocarver.com here, and from there you can set up your portfolio using one of Squarespace's professional templates. These templates look good out of the box, but are also very easy to customize due to Squarespace Blueprint, which is very intuitive with a drag and drop gallery and many easy to use design tools. Squarespace can be used simply like I'm using it, but it's good to know that if I ever need something more complex, Squarespace is ready to support that because they have add-ons for an online store, and all of this is right there when you need it. And if you do need an online store, customers can pay however works for them, be it credit card, PayPal, or Afterpay. So if you're looking to start a website, head over to squarespace.com/nebulaphotos. And when ready to make your first purchase, use code nebulaphotos at checkout to get 10% off. Okay, and you're now seeing everyone who supports this channel over on patreon.com/nebulaphotos. And I can't thank everyone you're seeing here enough because they're how I'm able to do Nebula Photos full time. And every month now I'm doing a monthly bonus video, and this month's bonus video sort of ties into what I was talking about here, where I'm considering what I'm using for different tasks in astrophotography processing, and I wanted to do a video for Patreon members. It's like an overview of deep sky processing today in 2025 and the capabilities of different programs. So I go over things like PixInsight and Serial and Affinity and Photoshop and all the different programs and give my thoughts on them and what their feature set are and how I use them today. For instance, like I use AstroPixel Processor as well because I haven't found anything that does mosaics better than that. So if you're interested in that kind of analysis, you can check it out over on my Patreon. It starts at just $1 a month. Well, till next time, this has been Nico Carver. Clear skies.